the talent in this industry is obviously very expensive. It's hard to find. It takes a lot of time. So we've seen a lot of opportunity with kind of getting a fractional sales model in there to help prove things out, build that pipeline, build some early results, get some early deals across the line, and then kind of scale the organization from there as well.
Working with founders at this stage can be the most challenging, but also the most thrilling and exciting because there's such a passion, like you said. The founder of a smaller organization is just they can sell anything, right? Because they've done their market research, they built from scratch, they're living and breathing it. Now there does come a point where that superpower of the founder-led sales starts to become a hindrance to scale. So what is that point? Maybe around 1 to 3 million. If sales start to slow down, that network, that relationship ecosystem has started to dwindle, and it is time to bring in that next level support.
It is hard to find the people that have expertise across different channels. And so sometimes, again, that's like building the team aspect instead of, always just looking for everything in one individual, too. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Spark Spotlight podcast. Today, I have Nikki Ahlgren here. She is from Hilo Talent Partners. Spark has been working closely with Nikki over the past year or so across multiple different clients. And she really focuses on helping with recruiting and executives and teams to support within the healthcare industry, and has a ton of expertise in the employer and payer markets based on her background and where she's really been working for years. So super excited to have her talk today a little bit about, really as organizations move from founder-led to more mature organizations, what are those different growth and talent needs that they have, and how do they need to be thinking about talent more strategically as an organization? So welcome, Nikki.
Thank you. So good to see you, Lindsay. So good to be on this podcast with you. Looking forward to our conversation. It's a conversation I'm very passionate about. Clearly, I've sort of dedicated this second half of my career to it. So very much looking forward to digging into this topic further. I'm Nikki Ahlgren, like Lindsay mentioned, with Hilo Talent Partners. I really serve growing emerging companies with talent strategies, recruiting strategies from executives on down to really critical roles in the organizations, and sales being such a critical, important part of the organization's growth, their success. Really, are they going to gain market share? Are they going to stay viable? I mean, really a critical function, and one that's tricky with a lot of different inflection points that I think we'll touch on today.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Nikki. So as we get started, I think it might be helpful to maybe just start with like setting context around like the job market today, especially when you think about B2B healthcare and kind of those sales elements. I know that I talk to people all day long who are looking for talent, but that also, are job seekers that are also looking for roles as well. So would love to hear kind of your thoughts on, kind of the healthcare talent market, specifically within sales, what organizations are looking for today, and a little bit just about, maybe some of those challenges going into 2026.
Yeah, well, let's look at 2025 even to start, and then we can talk forward as well. But like this year, what a year, what a weird year that I don't think anybody has anticipated, both in healthcare, but broader industries too, right? So I think we anticipated a January start, huge hiring year. There was a lot of positive momentum from Q4 of last year from organizations planning. They had great budgets in mind, they had resource needs in mind, and everything fell flat. Q1 was an incredibly weird, slow first quarter, which didn't seem normal, right? I think I'm hearing that from all aspects, not just in the talent space, but it definitely hit talent as well. When it comes to healthcare, I think what we've seen, and what most people, if you go out to conferences and you check out who's who and who's showing up and who's investing in marketing and who's investing in sales, it's really shifted even the last 2 or 3 years. So going to those conferences, in which I do, I know you do too, Lindsay, is getting out in the market and seeing what's out there and what's changing. Bigger companies have pulled back in terms of where they're showing up. There's a lot of point solutions in the healthcare space, B2B space, that have come and gone. I anticipate that trend to continue, honestly, but who's hiring, who's changing? There's really been a lot of influx and instability in the larger organizations. So there's really no safe area, let's call it, but so much opportunity. There's in times like this, there's ripe opportunity from good talent to really carve their own niche out right now and to find a place where they can add value. Just at a high level from a 2025 perspective and into 2026, when I think about talent, especially in sales, it's maybe not the time to pivot. Right. So I would say 2 years ago, when talent would call me and say, "Hey, I'm looking for a new job. I want to change industries. I want to change jobs. I want to change functions. I want to do something completely different." Now is not the time. um,
That's so interesting and a great point. Yes, I have thought that many times talking to people in my network.
Yes, that was a really good, productive conversation to have 2 years ago. There's
Mhm.
just not a market appetite for that. Right
Right.
now, it's doubling down on what you know and you're good at, the strengths you have, the network you have, the market you have, especially in sales. And again, other functions too. So just take this if you're not in sales or you're not hiring for sales, take a little bit of this feedback as a generic too. That could apply to you holistically, but now is the time to really focus, at least near term, call it the next 3 years, on your core strengths. Future you can look at pivoting, can look at really trying something different and net new. But companies, especially in healthcare, are looking for industry expertise. They're looking for network expertise. They're looking for in sales. What specific verticals can you bring me into and open the doors? There's more and more conversations around self funded healthcare B2B solutions want to get into the self-funded space and want people who've sold there before, but that's still new and emerging in terms of their go-to-market motion. So there's a lot of conversation around that, and to find that expertise is hard. So if you have that expertise, please call me because I would love to talk to you because I have plenty of clients looking for that space. But kind of going into next year, I think next year is going to be hunker down and or find a role that's very similar in terms of title, potentially a little more comp, but it's not going to be huge jumps. Find a place that's doing something really innovative, something different, something you're going to be excited about, but it's not going to be a time to make pretty radical changes. And then from the hiring perspective, right now, from 2025 Q4, this is the time frame we're in. I don't know when this is going to air, but just know that I'm talking about sort of Q4 2025 timeframe. Right now, what we're seeing is just a rapid demand for sales and marketing resources. Companies are
Mhm.
investing there. Companies are finally pulling the trigger to say, we're looking at 2026 and we need to have our team in place. And it's going to be quality over quantity. It's going to be a smaller team, but it's going to be the right team and they're going to have the right expertise to be successful.
Yeah, I mean, we've obviously seen that. We are seeing just a massive amount of demand, and we've seen a lot of companies wanting to move into the employer space or double down on maybe their payer efforts or really kind of focus on more of a channel or a sub channel within that world. So they may say, okay, we've already like done these things. How do we kind of take this strategy to the next level? So I think that that really makes sense in terms of like the expertise also that you were talking about, where people are like, I have this specific expertise and I can help you in this area. Because I've also kind of seen that that seems to be where many companies are focusing. Everything's a bit more like execution oriented as well. So, like, kind of looking for people that can roll up their sleeves and maybe deliver on a shorter timetable than maybe what you would have seen in the past as well. So,
Yeah, the leeway is a little bit shorter, meaning the time frame to close, the time frame to build a pipeline, timeline to execute, the expectations are going to be higher.
mhm. Yeah, and kind of building on that, so we always say that this is a super matrixed market that we're operating in. There's all these different types of players, and you have to kind of leverage relationships and, sales expertise and, existing playbooks and things like that to sell into these different channels and kind of work on these like multi-stakeholder types of arrangements. So given that, I think B2B healthcare sales is increasingly complex, is there like a typical type of profile of person that you think does well in that space that you would maybe recommend to founders or chief commercial officers as they're thinking about building their teams?
Such a good question. And being in my world where I get brought in when there's a challenge, I always get these curveballs where, I wouldn't say there's a standard profile, but from a core perspective, let's just, if there's a generic response to this that applies more broadly, I would say consultative sales are in. There is no more feature functionality, product service kind of conversations. It's all about, the clients at the end of the day, they want value, they want cost containment solutions, they want emerging AI technology, they want to be able to be, stay ahead of their competition. So if you're in sales and you have either a unique point solution, an AI solution, there's a lot of of things out there. How are you going to differentiate yourself, and how are you going to ensure that you're gaining the mind share and showing that improving the value? So that consultative sale is huge. Industry expertise in healthcare is huge. I don't think coming from another industry into healthcare right now is the right time. I think that you really need to have a significant portion of your career in the healthcare space. Now, like you said, I think that's very valid that clients are kind of looking for some candidates that can get into a couple of different verticals within healthcare, right? They're either payer health systems, they're self-funded, they're TPAs and brokers. There's going to be different parts of that that they really want to focus on. But if you can find multifaceted where, you know, your sales expertise can translate into a couple different verticals, that's even more impactful. So coming from different perspectives, let's just say you were a broker and then you went to a healthcare solution. Seeing both sides of the fence, or even kind of moving within that ecosystem to a payer for a period of time. If you're in sales, you've seen how the customer would buy, what the pain points are on both sides. So that profile I actually look for is somebody who's done a couple of different things, not just stayed in payer their whole career per se, right? I think they're going to be much more versatile and much more applicable to the needs that are happening, especially for earlier stage companies where they want to potentially try a few things out and see what their ideal market motion is, and then refine from there.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. That's certainly what we see as well. And you know, I mean, we help companies across multiple different channels, and we found that it is hard to find the people that have expertise across different channels. And so sometimes, again, that's like building the team aspect, instead of, you know, always just looking for everything in one individual too. So maybe we could move forward then. You know, a lot of organizations we work with are sometimes earlier stage, but growing quickly, you know, and so they're oftentimes moving from more of a founder led sales motion into a more mature sales motion. And they need to build the team to support them, where it's not all on the executive team to sell the product. But I know it's really hard for organizations. I mean, obviously, as the founder or the CEO, you know, you are the subject matter expert in the company, you are very passionate about it, and so it kind of makes sense for you to be, you know, in that sales role early stage. But then as you grow, you know, there's obviously other things that the founder and CEO and those teams need to focus on. So as you think about organizations that are looking to build a more mature sales organization, do you have any insights that you can share around, you know, kind of the challenges from moving from that founder led to the mature organization, when you think that makes sense, and sort of in terms of timing, and just kind of insight that you can share there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is part of the most exciting part of the journey, and where I find working with founders at this stage can be the most challenging, but also the most thrilling and exciting because there's such a passion, like you said. The founder of a smaller organization is just they can sell anything, right? Because they've done their market research, they built from scratch, they're living and breathing it. Now, there does come a point where that superpower of the founder-led sales starts to become a hindrance to scale. So what is that point? Maybe around 1 to 3 million. If sales start to slow down, that network, that relationship ecosystem has started to dwindle, and it is time to bring in that next level support. Now, there's probably other people on the team that are out co-selling with the founder too already at this point, maybe another co-founder, another partner, something like that, but they haven't brought in probably a true sales leader. Most entrepreneurs come from different backgrounds. They might be chemists or they might be clinicians, right? And they just really haven't done the full end-to-end sales cycle and have that maturity. So what I always recommend as a first next step is to bring in a player coach capable individual who is carrying a bag to start, right? They're carrying their quota, they are out hitting the streets, they are doing new logo, and have to be comfortable with the lack of support from marketing and no BDR work, no inbound leads. It's all outbound. It's really a tough place to start first and foremost. I would say as you grow that team, the next level people you bring in is thinking strategically of how many enterprise sellers versus mid-market sellers you want to bring in. You typically start with 1 or 2 enterprise, and then you might have 2 or 3 on the mid-market size as you grow, but really refining the motion, refining the playbooks. You already know, one, that the founder can sell it, there's a market. So that's a proof point that is leverageable by the incoming sales team. You don't want a clone of the founder. You want, that's a real thing. They want someone who can do it just like them. There's already one of them. You need to bring in people who could bring in these other aspects. And just another point on the founder transition piece. Sales cycles now are very high touch point, and long. So having the tenacity to handle a 9 to 18 month sales cycle with keeping momentum every single week is critical for the success of a lot of these organizations. So when there's demos, there's pilots, there's inbound leads, there's conference shows, there's no way a founder can be in the business and on the business at the same time with their focus. So that player coach is number one, bringing in some enterprise sellers, then the mid-market sellers, ideally somebody who can flex to initially. And then at that point, once there's a really clear pipeline, once there's a really clear motion and there's case studies, use cases, there's really a good definition around that ICP is, then you bring in the SDRs and BDRs because then they know what to sell and how to make that efficient and effective. So, that's going to be probably that third or fourth leg of growth and maturing. Marketing is typically fractional to start. Even a lot of founder-led sales start with fractional sales to start too, and that's not a bad idea. I'm sure you've seen some of that happening in your space.
Yes, yes. No, we have. We've seen a lot of demand recently as well for like the fractional sales executive model. And I think it's interesting to, talking about kind of the SDRs and the BDRs. So what we found is that oftentimes, those more executive enterprise level salespeople, certainly they have relationships and things that they can utilize for any new organization. But, doing a lot of that pipeline building and that outbound is not necessarily always their highest and best use. So we've seen a lot of success as well with like kind of helping companies with that pipeline building through kind of our fractional sales SDR BDR engine, as well as the strategic equity network that we've built where we can leverage people with like these really deep industry relationships. Because what we found a lot of the time is that, a CEO may bring in a chief commercial officer or chief revenue officer or a VP of sales to start. And, they're a team of one, right? And so they can't do everything. So, like, what's their highest and best use? And a lot of time it is, kind of running down that sale and thinking more about the sales strategy and things along those lines. So that's one area where we support. And then, I think the other thing, on your point around kind of the fractional sales executive as well is that, oftentimes as a company maybe is starting to scale. So to your point, they have product market fit, they have early customers, they have maybe that chief commercial officer in place, but then they need kind of the next level down of support, but they can't necessarily hire. Like the talent in this industry is obviously very expensive. It's hard to find. It takes a lot of time. So we've seen a lot of opportunity with kind of getting a fractional sales model in there to help prove things out, build that pipeline, build some early results, get some early deals across the line, and then kind of scale the organization from there as well.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that about the Sparks model, honestly, because I think that that's where more organizations are starting and evolving, and even not just starting, these sometimes are more mature organizations, but just trying to go into a new vertical or a new channel. That extra support really gives them the freedom and flexibility to not bring in the dedicated resources until they've had those proof points, until they have enough meetings scheduled on the books, until they've done enough demos, pilots, conversations to really vet that out and have a strong enough pipeline to move that in-house fully. I think both from the fractional SDR and BDR front and the sales account executive position, I think they need to be really defined on what success looks like in both of those because fractional sales is hard to find to do it well. And they'll know their piece of the work, especially if they're doing it part-time for any one client, that they know it really, really well for the chunk of the sales process that they're good at. So I wouldn't expect a fractional account executive to be able to go full cycle, everything end to end. So they might really be good at the introductions and door openers and that initial conversation, but then still bring in another leader or the founder again from the company to finish and facilitate the rest of the process. Now they're there to kind of shepherd the rest from there, but wouldn't be the full expert. So knowing that upfront and knowing the expectation setting of what you're going to get from those fractional resources and what's reasonable with the amount of time, the commitment that they have to dedicate to your organization. And then if that's not enough, then you move forward too with another approach. But I think it's very effective just setting the parameters, setting the KPIs and setting the expected outcomes. It has to be really clear.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, that's where we've, done well with this fractional commercial model because we can do soup to nuts, because to your point, I think that a lot of the time, these individuals are good at one aspect. And I think also that's a great point around making sure that's like a collaborative, engaged, agreement with the client or with the organization, because I think that relying on a fractional salesperson to manage things end to end without some level of like really active engagement from the founder, CEO, chief commercial officer, whoever it is really kind of setting that person up to fail typically. So
Yeah, and I guess to one other point on that, a trend I'm generally seeing is that a lot of companies today don't have full sales enablement training, onboarding. Common pitfall and mistake is here's the pitch deck, go. And with not a lot else, whether you're fractional or whether you're an AE, if this happens to you, it's not abnormal. It's really kind of a commonplace thing now. So being a self-starter, having a lot of initiative, having a lot of drive, asking a lot of questions, ideally not lone wolf selling, right? You have a team collaborative sales approach where you can bring in the other folks that are on the team, and you want an environment that really embraces that to be successful, because there isn't a lot of structured training and onboarding. It really takes a team to be bringing the right people to the table for those different conversations. So, that's an important part for leaders to think through. How are they going to enable the sales team and give them the support, the direct access to the team, and the support when and where they need it in the sales cycle, especially if they don't have more of that formal enablement and onboarding available.
yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. And I think that that's a good segue into kind of the vetting talent conversation. So I know you mentioned kind of that lone wolf profile that isn't ideal. We talked a little bit about consultative sales and how, really a more strategic sales process is what works best in our industry. But would love to hear if there's other talent types, that like sales talent types of criteria outside of those. And then obviously, expertise that you look for. So maybe like the softer traits in terms of like how somebody would work with an organization, and maybe also like how you make sure somebody's a good fit for an organization.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And I think that depending on the recruiter, I'll tell you a little bit about how I work and how we work at Hilo Talent Partners. But really, it's finding the client need, defining it super clearly. That means a very thorough review of expectation setting, skill set need, hard skills, soft skills, success metrics in the role, timing of when success is in the role. Like, how much leeway are we going to give a sales individual, for example? What does a quota ramp look like? What's the average sale? What's the average deal? And then translating that back into success that those individuals have had. So, for example, if they're used to selling $2 million deals at a very large Oracle type organization into healthcare, but try to translate that into a smaller organization that might have an average deal size of 100K. There could be different levels of frustration on both sides. So when we work with clients, we really take a tailored approach to setting the pre-work up front in the role definition and the qualities and the hard skills and just what the role is going to be doing. Get that very, very clear. And so, another thing too, especially about today's environment, is because the uniquenesses of each role, there definitely are. While there's some generalities, of course, there's every role has their own secret sauce and their own core needs. What we do is really focus on deep research and create a project, full end-to-end project around the way we go and scope and research for these candidates, right? So if there's ever a recruiter out there that says, we know this, we have a huge network, we have, a bench of people we have at the ready, I would take that with a little bit of a grain of salt, because people are always moving, always changing. Who's available, who's not available, who's interested, not interested, even if they're a perfect fit. So we always take this as a one-off unique solution. Of course, we have a network. Of course, we know this market space. Of course, we know the talent that's in it, but we always do a thorough project plan in order to make sure that we're getting a full scope of the market to not miss any potential good candidates, because that's the worst fear, right? Like you just keep relying on your same core bench over and over again. As a recruiter, that's not going to be effective any longer. So kind of going again, once you know the clarity on the job description, let's say, and the profiles, the adjacent industries we could search from, we get roughly, I'll just tell you some statistics. So if I'm searching for one role, I would typically find 100 companies that are aligned and would have similar like profiles. Then I would find 300 candidates that
Mhm.
are exactly aligned to that type of work. And I would do a campaign and outreach to those 300, typically narrow that down to about 70, which gets me to about 20 really good candidates that I would have deeper conversations with. And then the customer of mine or client of mine would end up seeing about 6. So as you can imagine, the funnel, the world gets a lot smaller, but within that, we're looking at all of those skills we've already defined. And that's going
Mhm.
to be the consultative selling piece. We talk through a complex selling motion that they're proud of, for example, as one question, really helping to identify where they found their pressure points, where they were able to navigate through complexity. If this is a SaaS related organization, I want to know that they've been able to take it full cycle and be able to navigate the red lines, the contracting, the IT security review, right? All of those pieces that could be hangups at the back end and being able to stick through those harder conversations and getting those right people to the table to get through those hurdles. Because just because everyone likes the product doesn't mean all those other pieces from legal and tech are going to fly through with flying colors. So, those are other pieces that I want to investigate in terms of the talent and what they've been able and capable to do, and that they have that tenacity. One piece that I love to add in, if clients allow me to, is an assessment that does a quantitative and qualitative approach to interviewing to make sure we understand the profile and if the candidate will be successful in the role. They might be the best salesperson in the world, but are they going to be successful in your role and with what you're selling? And that's really what we get to the meat of through a data-driven assessment. One component of that looks at their buying behavior. Typically, how somebody sells is how they prefer to buy. And there's a huge overlap there between those two. So when it comes to sales, everyone who's in sales should hopefully be able to sell themselves to you. So, having another layer and approach to that is, I think, unique to what we do.
Mhm.
And something that also makes sure that the success factors, they're more than just, our best approach on the interview cycle.
That's really interesting about matching their sales process to their buying, how they buy things. That's extremely interesting. I hadn't heard that before. So that's very cool. I think that the science around this is really interesting. And I think that's fantastic. You integrate that into your approach as well. What about in terms of, incentives, compensation, retention? Obviously it's one thing to bring on board a rock star salesperson, but you've got to keep them engaged. You talked about making sure that they're a really good fit for the organization and the type of sell and the sales process and the buyer type and matching all of that. But in terms of like really motivating top talent, are there trends and things that you're seeing currently that, maybe are different from the past or, recommendations you have there?
Hmm. Yeah, I think with sales folks, change is often hard, right? They're not the easiest adapters to change. So, for example, a change in compensation model, even though it's a change potentially for the better, which typically it's on the opposite side for the sales team individuals, but even if it were to be for the better, there's skepticism in that, and they have a short leeway in terms of playing that out because this directly impacts their bottom line, their take home pay, their family impact, right? So I think there's just a lot more factors on retention for sales that aren't a factor for other roles. So, for example, they can take a full sales cycle end to end and it can be great. But then, if customer success or the translation into the delivery function isn't smooth, isn't worked through, that's a challenge for the client. And they're in the front face of that, even if it's out of their control at that point and they quote unquote are done with that client. If they're just new logos, for example, there's still an impact in their reputation if other parts of the business isn't fully up and running, fully functional. So they're going to want to see that when they put their money where their mouth is and they say we can deliver, that it can be delivered internally, that comp doesn't change on them last minute or yearly. Leadership changes can be a challenge for retention, but even just downstream to the renewal, right? I mean, there's a lot of pieces that you don't think of impact sales directly, but that if all that's running smooth, they're going to stay. If they see success there and they can sell it and it's delivered like the company says it's going to be delivered on time, better than expected. Yeah, you keep those people around. And if you incentivize them right with a good model, ideally with some sort of a ramp and onboarding time, realistic onboarding time, once they get past that and they see that traction and momentum and everything else is working smooth, they will stay. The most common things I hear today from people that are looking for a new job or looking to make a switch is that downstream impact. We just couldn't deliver what I sold. So that's frustrating. That's a challenge. Or, even with a lot of newer AI and especially agentic solutions, there sometimes can be a little bit more challenge on the back end with those than anticipated too. So if it's a little clunky, it's not quite worked through and you're selling an earlier stage product, you kind of have to have that tenacity to stick that through and continue to work through those iterations and improvements that are happening. So I know I kind of went on a couple different tangents there, but I'm seeing a lot right now, and I have so many
Yeah.
conversations with people that it's there's definitely some trends in there, but yeah, not necessarily new trends, but on the AI side, that I'm hearing that more frequently now too.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, and I think that a lot of earlier stage companies struggle with that because, okay, so, maybe they found product market fit, but they don't have a huge book of like lots of great logos to share. They maybe have a handful of case studies, so I think that it's oftentimes a very different early stage person that's going to fit that profile from a sales perspective than once it's a more mature organization, which I know we talked about a little bit earlier, but I think that that's something really important for people to think about as they're going out there and, hiring sales talent, that like you have to make sure that the fit is also, the right for your organization and your stage of maturity and maybe where your product is. I would think for some of these earlier stage individuals as well, especially if you're looking for somebody at a more executive level, equity would obviously be interesting, at those organizations. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I do get candidates sometimes in the cycle that'll say, well, does this company have equity? And they might not be at a senior level where it wouldn't be a fit. But if equity hasn't already been on the table, that takes some time to work through, right? That's a big change in thought process for the founders, co-founders to offer equity, to go through the legal hurdles of just putting that structure in place. It's great. And, that's really an incentive for people to move to a startup is to have that ownership and that share. But I understand from the other side too, being a founder of what that looks like and that investment in talent too. And you want people to stick around for the long haul, especially if they're handing that part of the business over and sharing in that piece of it. But it's absolutely an attraction factor for sure.
yeah, yeah. Very cool. Well, this has been fantastic, Nikki. I really appreciate you coming on board. I mean, obviously, you are an expert in this space. So I feel like you're just a wealth of information. I can see why you've done such a fantastic job helping all of our clients that we've introduced you into. So really excited to have you here. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
I just really appreciate the opportunity to work with your team, Lindsay. Honestly, I know we didn't really share this at the beginning, but how we met was I was faced with a very similar challenge to what the Spark clients have, which is really trying to navigate if I want to go get my product sold into self-funded, how are we going to get there? And how do we spend our time wisely? Because time is money. You only get so much funding. You have to work quickly to find that perfect product market fit. And when I saw what you were doing, and we connected on it, I just really felt like we were aligned in our values, aligned in how we approach this challenge and how we think about it, how we support our clients holistically, and having this sort of end-to-end approach that you've and your team have designed in terms of that consulting and that go to market. And I'm passionate about it too. I really appreciate you taking the time and doing these conversations as well to educate the market on what you're seeing and what we're all seeing so that we can all just get better.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Nikki. I appreciate that. We've really enjoyed working with you as well. So thank you so much for coming on for the podcast today. And thank you, everybody, for listening.